Scott Trust is probably one of the most unusual newspaper owners in the world. Its role is to look after the security of the Guardian newspaper in perpetuity, and as a secondary aim, it's there to promote and sponsor independent and liberal journalism.
The Guardian was started in 1821 by the Taylors. In the 1870s, they appointed C.P. Scott, who at that point was 25 and had never, I think he'd never been in a newspaper, let alone edited one, but he was made editor. He was there for 57 years. He bought the paper, and he was, without question, an astonishing figure not only in the Guardian's history, but in the history of British newspapers.
He was an MP as well as being the editor of the paper. And as an MP and as the editor of the paper, he had the ear of all the senior members of Parliament of the time. He was a man of strong beliefs, he was a great writer, and he had a huge belief in the public responsibility of the paper.
The Guardian did not become internationally known until the war in South Africa, when CP took a strong line opposing the war.
He was really only interested in a newspaper as a kind of moral force, something that told the truth as it saw it and was passionate about that function. His main preoccupation was the leader column. He would arrive by bicycle in the office with a piece of tin foil in which there was wrapped a solitary boiled egg, and he would then think about just the leader column. And that was what inspired him and drove him. And what the Guardian said in those leader columns had huge power and influence.
C.P. Scott wrote a great leader on the occasion of the centenary of the paper. And in it, he lays out the values that he thinks the newspaper should have, and these are the values which the Scott Trust holds as its own today. Honesty, what he called cleanness, and we interpret as integrity, courage, fairness, duty to the paper and to the readers of the paper and to the society in which the paper is published.
CP died on the first day of 1932, and the funeral was quite extraordinary. All the family took part. I think there were 10 Daimlers.
The streets of Manchester were packed 8 deep with people from the city who turned out to see the passing of this great man. And they saw somebody of real power and moral conviction who had created something that was way beyond just a newspaper.
CP had left the business in the hands of John and Ted Scott, but unfortunately my great-uncle Ted Scott died shortly after in a boating accident.
I was driving the ship, if that's what you call it, and it turned over. My father told me to sit on the ship while he swam ashore. We weren't very far, but his heart was not all that strong, and after a couple of minutes or so, there he was no longer.
Had John also died at the time of Ted's death or shortly thereafter, death duties would have become payable.
It was quite clear to John Scott that death duties would finish the paper. He talked the matter over with his advisors and his friends, and it took him 3 years or so to come up with what was considered the best answer, which was the formation of a trust who would have sole ownership of the paper.
In that way he did avoid death duties, but I think he was seeking a lot more than that in terms of preserving the legacy and the heritage.
They put virtually their whole family fortune into the Scott Trust. It must be one of the great acts of generosity by any family in recent memory.
It's completely, as I think, unique and rather brilliant way of not only ensuring the continuance of a paper, but also ensuring its complete independence.
The trust was at that stage a family trust, but was then amended in 1948 so that the appointment of trustees became a collective act rather than a family appointment.
Our legal advisor, he had to transfer a share of the money to each of the new trustees in order that they should be able to turn it over to the new trust. Each one of us was worth a considerable amount of money, alas, for 5 or 10 minutes before we voluntarily handed it over to the new trust.
The trust deed doesn't contain any very clear prescription about what the trustees are supposed to do, except to continue the business as heretofore. And that's what the editors of The Guardian and The Observer are enjoined to do.
That's all you're told. You have this paper and you're told that you must carry it on as it has been in the past. And it's up to you to interpret that.
One of the key injunctions to the Scott Trust and its trustees is to protect the independence of its editors. And I think that means from its own interference as well as anybody else's.
I think if you wanted one key moment that would symbolise the importance and the way the trust worked, it would have come in 1956. Alistair Hetherington was faced with the Suez War, and Hetherington was absolutely unhesitating in coming out and declaring that this was an act of folly. Sales took a hit and advertising took a hit. And it was the sort of moment where a commercial company owning a newspaper might well have had a word with the editor and said, this is simply not doable. The Scott family at that point said to Hetherington, you must say what you want to say, we'll support you. And of course now everyone says that The Guardian was completely right, and this was a kind of sort of historic moment in The Guardian's life.
C.P. Scott was a Manchester businessman. He wasn't a fuffer around. He thought that efficient businesses should be in the marketplace and compete in the marketplace and do so successfully. But he quite understood that there were other values which should inform liberal journalism. And the existence of the trust enables us to pursue those values while at the same time pursuing the profit-seeking objective of a decent, responsible and efficient business.
One of the key planks of the Scott Trust is to ensure the financial independence of the group.
The Trust owns the Guardian Media Group, which is a commercial entity enjoined to make a profit. The purpose of that profit is to help the Trust aim to keep the Guardian going in perpetuity.
I think there's a great danger in contemplating throwing out the legacy, the heritage, the principles of 1936 as being inappropriate in today's changing world. But the responsibility to the reader, the desire for factual accuracy, the desire to contribute to the community, none of these things change.
Something like the Scott Trust has more relevance, more salience, more importance, and I think it will give us a real editorial and actually commercial advantage as we go forward.
Undoubtedly, CP will be very proud of today's Guardian because it was his life, and the paper is greatly esteemed, I think, throughout the world. But it is quite different.
I wonder what C.P. Scott would make of this today. I think he would be deeply shocked. But I'd like to think that he would look at this flourishing group, a hugely successful commercial enterprise, supporting great newspapers. The Guardian absolutely flourishing, probably more secure than it's ever been. The Observer added to the stable. And I think he would be very proud.